So today's reading is from the Bhagavad Gita. This passage is from the 4th chapter, the 6th and 7th stanzas. Unborn, changeless, Lord of creation and controller of my cosmic nature, though I am, yet entering nature, I am dressed in the cosmic garment of my own Maya. O Bharata, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate on earth, taking visible form. I come to destroy evil and reestablish virtue. Swamiji writes, here the Bhagavad Gita confronts a great mystery. God is described in both the Hindu and Christian religions as having incarnated on earth, in Christian religion as Jesus, in the Hindu as Krishna, and as other great masters who from time to time have been sent to earth as saviors of mankind. Among Orthodox Christians, there is no question of any other divine incarnation than that of Jesus. His birth is accepted as unique. The great mystery, therefore, of how such an event could take place is not deeply pondered. It is accepted, quite simply, miraculously. In the Hindu religion, however, because of the scriptural promise of repeated incarnations of God, it is more natural that there should have been attempts made to explain the meaning of divine incarnation. The vast spirit, to begin with, would seem indeed to be conscious of mankind. Prayers have often been answered, many of them miraculously. Indeed, the concept of omnipresent implies infinitesimal smallness, quite as much as infinite immensity. The same is true of the concept of omniscience. As Christ put it, the very hairs on your head are all numbered. God has appeared in vision to saints in every age. He has been seen as a light, heard as a sound of many waters or of mighty thunder, felt as an overwhelming love or as infinite bliss. His light has taken on form, human or otherwise. His sound has become a voice and expressed itself in human speech. His love has been manifested in the radiant gaze of the Divine Mother or Krishna or Jesus, and in many other divine manifestations of light and ecstatic consciousness. No such experience could ever define him, in the sense of limiting him, yet every experience has manifested something of his infinite nature. God created everything. Everything, therefore, in a sense, is his manifestation. In superconscious experiences, however, his manifestation is special, for it does not conceal the indwelling spirit. It reveals it. Divine visions express God's will openly to man. They spiritualize whomsoever they touch. They are a conscious revelation of the divine reality in a way that material objects and unenlightened human beings can never be. God's superconscious manifestations in visions and the like are always fleeting, like the waves on the sea. As the waves, in their movement and diversity, recall us ever to the sea's vastness, so divine manifestations are intended to recall our minds to the vast reality they express. There is nothing strange in the thought of God manifesting himself in human form. He does so indeed, in a sense, every time he appears in a vision to the saints. For through that saint's testimony and through the magnetic influence of his ecstasy, the Lord becomes more of a vivid reality to others. God may be said to manifest himself through every saint who lives in a state of inner communion with him. Such a saint, then, who is born in a state of conscious communion, because freed of the delusion of ego, may be said to be already, in a sense, an incarnation of the divine consciousness. If nothing remains of his limited ego, and if that master's consciousness is only of God's presence within, his very mission on earth is like a wave rising in full consciousness upon the surface of the infinite sea, expressing consciously not itself, but the vast sea around it. No wave could ever express that vastness perfectly, nor could any divine manifestation in human form be God's only unique human manifestation. God could no doubt manifest himself on earth directly. He could even materialize a human body and live forever among men, thereby giving people everywhere a living focus for their devotion. Were he to do so, however, he would distract people from seeking him in themselves, where alone he can actually be realized, and from expanding their little consciousness to his infinite bliss. Jesus reminded his disciples, the kingdom of God is within. The highest scriptural teachings are ever a reminder of this truth, namely, that God must be sought within man, not outside of him through the senses. No man is God. The wave cannot pretend to be the ocean. The ocean of divine awareness, however, which has become all the waves of physical phenomena, may be said to express itself consciously through those great souls whose consciousness is merged in the Lord. We too, as devotees, should strive always to incarnate the divine consciousness in our own lives. Let us live more by inner guidance. Let us strive to be channels of divine inspiration. Let us heed God's call in the soul to seek him, to know him, to merge in him. Thus may we find release from our age-old delusion of separateness from his infinite bliss. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
It really is a joy to be with you all, and thank you for coming this morning. This passage is from the Gita, is perhaps one of the most quoted passages, most frequently quoted passages of the Bhagavad Gita. This passage is one of the most frequently quoted. It was, I think, quoted to me even when I was a young child, that whenever darkness rises, it was paraphrased, that I incarnate myself on earth to destroy evil. And Swamiji pointed out many times that Krishna says to destroy evil, not evildoers. And meaning that really it's the evil that prevails, it's the evil that pervades, it's the darkness that gets pushed back and fought back, as opposed to the people, the person. All of us, to a certain extent, have Maya in us. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here to say it. You wouldn't be here to hear it. We would be, as Sri Yukteswar said, adorning, decorating with our beautiful presence some other world. And so I don't say this in self-criticism or for us to feel badly, but just for us to accept things as they are. We are works in progress. We are growing. And also as a reminder for ourselves, lest we point at someone else and say, they are evil, they are doing wrong, why are they acting this way? Of course, such things can be unpleasant. But our job lies clearly before us. The only responsibility that the universe places upon our shoulders is for us to know ourselves, is for us to work on ourselves and to improve ourselves. Pray for others, but they're really God's responsibility. It's up to Divine Mother to take care of her other children. And so we can take care of them and to those whom we are entrusted, but only to a certain extent. We're not responsible in a deeper sense for them. We're hardly responsible for ourselves. I mean, we are, but we strive to behave responsibly regarding ourselves. But any more than it would be silly to see one 2-year-old trying to take care of another 2-year-old. That is what the Amma is for. That is what the Appa is for. And so, in the same way, we should trust that Heavenly Appa and Divine Amma are on the job, taking care of everybody. So, when this passage comes to mind, it can bring up a number of thoughts that, whenever things get too bad on earth, God incarnates in physical form on earth to drive back evil and to reestablish virtue. So, of course, it's very comforting, as Swamiji describes in the reading that Dharmini read, that God takes an interest in this earth. God takes an interest in human affairs. And Swamiji addresses the doubt that is sometimes raised. If God really is infinite and vast, then how could he care about one particular planet out of, billions? How could he care about one particular person on that planet? Me, out of billions. And as one person, when they put this question to Yoganandaji about if God is so infinite, then how could he think in such small terms? Master said, your concept of infinity is too finite, is too limited. He said, infinity, infinite largeness also implies infinite smallness. God is not only infinitely large, but also infinitesimal. And I sometimes like to describe it as, just as there are an infinite number or an infinite quantity of numbers, there's also an infinite quantity of numbers between 0 and 1. All the decimals, you can go infinitely deep just in that one little interval. So I said I like to describe it. It doesn't mean anyone likes to hear it described that way, but you'll have to forgive me. These mathematical samskars die hard. So we can comfort ourselves to say God takes an interest. We can say, well, when things have been rough before, in the past, God came on earth. And so we have for example, the Dasa Avatar, the 10 avatars of God, or at least 9, described, their incarnations described, and it generally is introduced that Mother Earth was crying out under the weight of so many sinners and so much evil, and the good people, the few, 6 good people that were left on earth, no, I'm joking, but were crying out saying, please, please help us, please intervene. And so God intervened. And so again, we can think of this as something that happened in the past. As Swamiji points out, before I get to that, we can also think, God, I think it's high time that you could come now, that things aren't going so well even in this moment, and could you incarnate yourself now, please, and clean things up for us? And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But meaning maybe it will happen or maybe it won't. But if we look at it just from that point of view alone, it's helpful on one level, but it's not necessarily helpful in a practical way. Because if God incarnates from time to time, what about the other times? What if our incarnation is scheduled for a time where God isn't busy incarnating, but is just resting in his bliss beyond creation, and meanwhile we're stuck here? And him saying, sorry, you got me on an off day. And so then what of us? So not only that, but it isn't always easy to identify God's divine incarnations. God often is born, nearly always, I don't know if I can make that claim, but very often born into humble circumstances. Krishna's parents were put in prison, and he was born in the prison. And Jesus was born in a food trough for animals. That's what a manger is. And so, not born, in a palace necessarily, though I suppose Buddha was born in a palace. So the thing then to remember is that God coming to earth isn't just only when he comes in a big grand way to clean up the whole place. But what about when he comes to clean up our own lives? And this is the point that Swamiji makes, that in a sense God is born on earth in the consciousness of every great master. And I think he would describe such as an enlightened soul, as someone with nirvikalpa samadhi, a jivan mukta, someone liberated. God is born on earth in that form. Yes, there is a distinction between an avatar and you could say, normal saint. Master described it as being liberated or fully liberated. When you're liberated, which is our first step, our goal, our next step, without describing how many steps there are in between, is to get rid of the ego, which generates karma. It's not to get rid of all karma, but to get rid of the karma generator, that which is creating karma, the ego. And so that is the state of a jivan mukta, liberated, as Master said, to become fully liberated, which then makes you an avatar if you incarnate again on earth. Then we do have to clear out all past karma. Master said the fully liberated saints in Autobiography of a Yogi were very few. Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, at another time he described himself as an avatar. And then he said 2 disciples of Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Pranapananda and Ram Gopal Muzumdar. And so we can see already that this is quite significant, that if in Master's time we had these avatars who are also our line of gurus, and 2 more avatars thrown in, or at least fully liberated souls, Ram Gopal Muzumdar and Swami Pranapananda, there was quite something important happening at that time for so many souls to come. And we could say, yeah, gosh, too bad we missed them. But it's not true. Because first of all, these saints aren't limited in time and space the way normal people, the way normal saints are. But also, they came to establish a mission that we are a part of. They came to help this planet and people, and in particular, for this line of gurus, to bring Kriya Yoga, to bring the concept of the unity of all religions, the underlying truth. This is very important, and the power of their message, the power of their presence continues with us, and really we are a part of that in terms of serving that mission, and we are also the beneficiaries of that, because again, they've come to help us. Swamiji then makes the point very specifically, which is the most practical of all, that in a very real sense, God has also come to incarnate in our own lives. And this is where the statement from the Gita, which perhaps every time you hear it is an inspiration, or perhaps when sometimes something is repeated too often without deep devotion, it can become, through no fault of its own, it can become just sort of flat. It's not the fault of the Gita, certainly, but when these words are just thrown around too much, when we hear it too much, then it's harder to feel the inspiration behind it. It can be anyway. And so, when we realize that God is also seeking, not just through the ages to come from time to time to uplift the earth, but to in every one of our lives, in our own life. Maybe you could think of it from moment to moment, chapter to chapter in your life, God is trying to come in. And it isn't that God only comes in every 7 years or so when you really need help. But in fact, God is trying to come into our lives every moment, and can come and does come to the extent that we invite the divine consciousness in. And this is especially felt when we come to our guru, when we meet our master, when we meet a liberated soul through his writings or her writings or the videos, if there's any such exist, then all of us, I think, can relate to that when we, for example, on this path, discovered Autobiography of a Yogi, if that's how we began our journey with Master, or when we, if we took a meditation class, or if we just came across these teachings on the internet. But that spark, that beginning. I was speaking to a few friends yesterday about some of them were sharing their early journeys on the path, and how a number of them described that something kept impelling me, drawing me to continue. Someone else said, I've been much more involved in these teachings than I have in any other teachings before. I'm sort of surprised at myself how devoted and sincere I've become in following these in a way that I think perhaps the person had wanted to before, but somehow wasn't gripped, wasn't engaged, wasn't held. And she also added, and I'm happier, more happy, and happier than I've ever been before in practicing these teachings. And of course, that's the motivation for all of us. It isn't just that in the abstract, I concede that having more divine consciousness in my life would be a sufficiently positive proposition, something that I wish to propel forward. Maybe it will aggregate with dividends. You know, it's not some intellectual, formal investment. It is that it brings us joy. It's addictive, as another friend of mine mentioned once. These things, we can't help it. We find more and more joy as we move in this direction. And then when we step away from it, or when we fall away from it, if we get distracted or busy, then suddenly we find after a time, where's that joy I used to always feel? Where's that freedom that I don't feel as even sort of safe and secure as I used to, because the ego is starting to come forward, and the ego feels fragile, because it is. But God and our soul, we ourselves are not fragile at all. I mean, what's the most biggest threat to our security, it can seem? Death itself. And Swamiji said, why be afraid of death? Think of how many times you've died already. Every lifetime ends that way, and every life then begins again with a birth. Remember also that with every birth, with every death, physical death on earth, there is a birth in the astral world, and a lot of rejoicing among those spiritual friends of ours, those who have already passed, family members who are there welcoming us back, so Master said. And just as on earth when a baby is born there is so much rejoicing, in the astral world there is a funeral. Because, look, poor old Nagarajan has gone back again to earth to serve out a prison sentence. We'll sort of send him what help we can from the astral world until he's back again. And so the thing that, again, is easy for us to summon up devotion and enthusiasm and gratitude is how the divine has been born into our own lives. How we have, again, come to this path, or whatever path you're on, how we've come to our Guru. And really the Guru represents, in a microcosm, our divine Savior. And I was going to say our avatar, and yes, I mean, again, if you want to split hairs, then maybe not every guru is an avatar, and it doesn't matter, because as Master said, in heaven there is no captain and assistant captain and soldiers. For those who are one with God, they're all one with God. But he said at another time that an avatar is able to bring more of God's power into this world, able to manifest and to channel more of the divine power. So in that sense, we could compare, not that we're trying to compare, but in terms of the scope of the work or the mission that an avatar has. But that's superficial. Really, there was another liberated soul, fully liberated, Master said, Sri Rama Yogi, who he didn't write of in Autobiography of a Yogi, This yogi is described in a book by a man named Paul Brunton, and that book had come out around that same time. And Master said, I also met Sri Rama Yogi, but I didn't want to steal the thunder from Paul Brunton's book, so I didn't mention him. See how gracious and thoughtful Master was in that way. It wasn't for another reason. He said, I just didn't want to take that from Paul Brunton. Very nice. And in fact, a good example for us to follow. I don't mean that if you meet fully liberated masters, you need not mention them in case someone else has. But I think you can understand how we can apply that in other ways. So the feeling then that of Sri Rama Yogi, not the feeling of Sri Rama Yogi. I switched thoughts in the middle of a sentence. Sri Rama Yogi was fully liberated, didn't have any mission at all. Swamiji said, as far as I could tell, he barely had any disciples. One was his uncle, and one was a professor who would come out and talk to him from time to time. He lived in Buchireddypalayam in Andhra Pradesh, which is near Nellore. And he also, maybe someone would come and discuss diet with him, and Swamiji said, you have so much realization. Why not help more people? And the saint, because Swami Kriyananda met him also, and the saint replied that God has done what he wants with this body. And so 2 fully liberated masters we could look at, Sri Rama Yogi and any of the others I mentioned, and some of them had vast, large works, and some had none. So again, it's not a fair basis of comparison. It proves how unnecessary it is. But who cares about comparisons? We care about what has come to each of us, what thrills our heart. Remember, it's not always easy to recognize, let's say it frankly, it isn't easy to recognize the divine stature, even of one's own guru. If to fully understand our guru, we would have to have his state of consciousness or her state of consciousness. Master, in fact, said that to Swamiji when Swamiji first came. Swamiji was a young man, and he said he was viewing Master as a very wise man, and which Master was much more than that. And Master one day looked at him deeply in the eyes and said, "If you knew my consciousness." I wonder sometimes if Swami Kriyananda wasn't saying that to us also. Because, again, the Guru sits at the dinner table and eats a meal, and we can only perceive as much as according to the quality of our own instrument. In other words, if we have a piece of glass that we're looking through, or even eyes that we're looking through, if our vision is clouded or blurry, we won't see as clearly. And that's true, of course, of our mind, even of our power of intuition. Luckily, just as the glass can be cleaned or polished and purified, so too can our vision, our intuition, our hearts. The more we meditate, the more we spend time, as Sri Yukteswar said, in the company of divine personages, the more we feel inside of us not only how powerful this my Guru is, how thrilling and joyful, and how easily uplifted I am in his presence. When Swamiji meditated with Master, one of the first times they meditated together in a group, Swamiji said he felt his consciousness forcibly drawn up to his spiritual eye and magnetically held there. And he said how instantaneous it was and how much easier it was than it had ever happened with his own unaided efforts. And he said he began to realize even more how the truth behind the scriptural statement that there is no blessing greater in all the 3 worlds than that of having a true guru. And we begin to feel not only, as I said, that thrill, that joy, that power from the guru, and how lucky we are to be with him, but also we feel that there is something in me also that responds. The Guru's purity echoes or resonates inside of me, and I feel my own purity, my own potential for divine realization. I realize that I love him according to my own capacity to love, and that the strength of my love is increasing. And that I want to be I want to fully realize that. I want to fully polish my heart until it shines brightly. And I want to be, in fact, who I really am. These moods are not us. These periods of spiritual ups and downs, those are not us. That is just Maya. That is just duality. That isn't something to tune into and think that it's real. It's very distracting. The waves on the surface of the sea are all we can notice at sometimes, especially if they're, for example, crashing in a storm, or if they're shimmering in the light and it's even dazzling our eyes. It would be nice to see any waves on any sea right now. We've been trapped indoors due to this blasted COVID. But as soon as we go beneath the surface, I mean, the surface of the sea represents what? I don't even know. Maybe, 0.1% of the entire ocean. I mean, the surface area of the ocean. I mean, to literally compare it, you'd have to, take the volume of it. But say the first inch of water on the ocean, that's all that we can see versus all the depth below. And so too, not only with this world, meaning this reality that we live in, but not only that, but so too ourselves. We are much more than our ego tells us, than our mind tells us. And we start to feel that when we meditate, when we feel thrilled by the blessings of the Guru, by the feeling of God's grace. What does that feel like? Swamiji once said, God's grace is that good feeling you get when you perhaps watch a video of Swami Kriyananda, for example, if you feel that. When you come to a satsang, I use the video example first because it's more common. Coming to a satsang we can do online, and you can remember when we also were able to gather in person. When you go to a temple, when you go on a pilgrimage, when you read something in a book and it strikes you and you feel a thrill that's deeper than just emotional and intellectual. That good feeling, that sense of protection, that sense of God's presence, that silence that feeds us, all of that is an experience of God's grace. And Master described the 8 manifestations of God: sound, light, peace, calmness, joy, wisdom, power, and love. That we feel, when we feel in meditation, one of those feelings, for example in Hong Sa, feeling the experience of peace, that really helps us to know this is a divine experience. It's not just an emotional cessation of stress and the relief that comes just because I'm not so worried. It's much more than that. And we know that because it sustains us. But how do we know it? We know because we know. There's a fun statement that a friend quoted to me recently, that to those with faith, no explanation is necessary. And to those without faith, no explanation is possible. And how do we develop that faith which knows? Through experience. That's the difference between faith and belief. Belief is just intellectual. It's helpful because it's like a hypothesis. I think this could be true. I want this to be true. I hope it's true. Is it true? That's the question. So the belief sets us out on that direction to test, to try, to experiment. But it is when we experience, and through repeated experience, that then we begin to build our faith. And in this sense, there's no difference when talking of faith and belief and faith there's no difference between us talking about that in the realm of religion, in the realm of science even. I mean, for example, we know that E equals mc squared. Why? Because Einstein said so. Well, that's just belief. We believe Einstein was true. No, it's much more than that. It has been experimentally verified. By whom? By you? No. By me? I mean, maybe you have, but unlikely. By me? No, definitely not. But there are people who have, and they've said it, and so other people seem to agree with them, and so I do too. And I think that's correct. But still, we really just accept it as a matter of belief. Unless we've done that experiment ourselves, we don't know for sure. So again, that belief and faith is the real question when trying to discern truth. It's not a question at all of science versus religion, because you can be very scientific in your approach to religion, and you can be very religious, which unfortunately in this case I mean dogmatic, just declaring without proof in science. So again, these are attitudes of a human mind. These are not domains of inquiry, and again, they're not aspects of truth. The only question really is belief versus faith, and we can have faith that God will incarnate on earth. We can have faith that God will incarnate in our lives as we build our experience, again, as I said, through meditation, through devotion, through connection with the Guru, through connection with Guru Bhais. As Nayaswami Haridas has said, our Guru Bhais, our friends, sometimes someone can heal us with a glance, just a smile, just a greeting, and I feel a weight removed, because I've spent a lot of my time building up walls, either to protect myself from the thoughts coming to me from without, or to try to protect myself from the thoughts coming from within, my own stupid thoughts that are harassing me. And then just the sight of a friend's smile, or the thought of a happy time spent where I had an experience of God in however small a form, that just washes away the restlessness and the discomfort of the moment. So seek these experiences. Remember, environment is stronger than willpower. And so it doesn't mean you will always be overrun by your environment, but it means it has a very strong influence. So make your environment a positive one. Regardless of the things that you can't control about your outer environment, we can always control what we're listening to. Literally, meaning what we're listening to in terms of audio recordings or video or whatever, or music, but also what messages we're listening to. A friend of ours who left the body was saying, as she had a prolonged time to leave the body, meaning because of illness, and she said, I really can't afford the luxury of a negative thought. There's just not enough time. And so why spend that time in any negative thought? I just can't do it. And so that would be a helpful thing for us to practice too. Just, sorry, my time is limited. My time for meditation is limited. The thoughts will come. Put them aside. Sorry, maybe you are for later. Maybe for the next incarnation, which, maybe I won't even have. At least as a bound soul, I want to get free before that. So, let us invite God to incarnate in our lives, even now, even in this moment, and forevermore. God bless you.